This is the second video of a two-video series that focuses on identifying performance obligations. If you haven't already watched the first video, I'd encourage you to do so, because that's the video where we talk about identifying promised goods or services and then identifying which of those promised goods or services meet the criteria to be performance obligations. In that video, we created an example, which is what we're looking at on the screen here, which, by the way, this is the software that we created to help companies understand and implement the requirements of the revenue standards, and this software is located at tazglobal.co. I'll be using this software throughout these video series to communicate the requirements of the standards. So in our previous video, we identified software license, when and if updates, and tech support as being separate performance obligations. This portion of the series is going to focus on what are the attributes of those performance obligations and do they impact the accounting, but it'll also highlight some other areas that we need to consider to make sure that we've identified all performance obligations in a contract. So focusing now on the first question here, it asks, is the performance obligation a series of goods or services that are substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer? The idea is that if the performance obligation is a series of substantially the same services, then they actually would be combined to form a single performance obligation. An example that's talked about, I believe, is even in the standard, it focuses on cleaning services. And if you enter into a contract, call it a one-year contract for a company to provide cleaning services over the course of a year, what they do every day is basically the same. There's not much difference from a cleaning service at the beginning of the week versus the end of the week, etc. So if this contract were for every day of the year, in theory, you would have 365 separate performance obligations. Well, the standard says if you have a series of substantially the same performance obligations, for example, one day of the cleaning service, that also has the same pattern of transfer to the customer, then you combine those, in our example, 365 performance obligations and treat them as a single performance obligation. Now, to have the same pattern of transfer to the customer, it first of all must be measured over time, or it must be a performance obligation that's recognized over time, and it must have the same measurement of progress. So once again, if you focus on the I, you can see some examples of series performance obligations, and the question mark will also give you some insight into a summary of the requirements themselves. But let's say software, we're going to say no. When and if updates, we'll know. But we'll say, for purposes of our example, tech support is. We'll say that basically what you do in tech support is the same each day. So moving on now to the next question in the analysis, it focuses on, for performance obligations identified below, is there another party involved in transferring the good or service to the customer? The idea is, and this is similar to what existed under previous accounting, but the idea is if you have another party involved in transferring a good or service to the customer, you need to analyze and determine whether you're the principal or the agent in the transaction. So if you answered yes to one of the questions and say yes, there is another party involved in transferring this good or service to the customer, then you're going to be prompted with some questions to help you to identify whether or not you're the principal agent in the transaction, in the transaction. For purposes of our analysis, though, I'll just say no. So now we're going to focus on, there's a couple of other areas where you might have performance obligations, and one of them, which is explicitly called out within the standard, relates to warranties. So the question is, does the company offer a warranty in connection with the sale of the good or service? So if you had answered yes to that question, then you're going to be prompted with additional questions. The first one is, does the company offer to sell the warranty separately? If it does, then right off the bat, you have a separate performance obligation. So that portion of the analysis would be complete. But if you said no, you're prompted with an additional question, which is, does the warranty offer the customer a service that goes beyond compliance? So if you have a warranty that just simply says that a product will function as in accordance with the specifications, then it's not a separate performance obligation. But if the warranty does go beyond assurance of compliance, it's a separate performance obligation. For purposes of analysis, I'll say no, though. Now, the next area, it talks about purchase options. And the question here is, if you have an option embedded in a contract that creates a material right for a customer, then it would be a separate performance obligation. Things to look at here could be like tiered pricing arrangements. So effectively, with a tiered pricing arrangement, the customer is being offered the option to purchase additional goods or services at a discount. Another could be opt-in clauses or termination provisions, which could allow the company to effectively opt in and re-up or renew for a couple additional years. Depending on the pricing of some additional years, that feature could also create a material right. So for purpose of our analysis, we'll click no.